But it's just constant singing, constant barracking. I've never known anything like it.
Never in a million years do I believe that Liverpool fans would want Everton to go down.
If you've got a lad who's local and can just sort of give it some in a derby, oh my word, what that gives him with the fans is incredible.
You basically got told there's only 2 games where you really have to be at your very, very best, and that's the North London derbies.
Hello, this is High Press, brought to you by William Hill in partnership with the Football Writers Association. I'm Alison Bender, and every week we're going to be joined by Fleet Street's finest, debating the biggest footballing topics. So with the Merseyside derby on the way and Arsenal against Chelsea, we are talking derbies. What makes them such a big rivalry? Why is it important? And which is the best derby? So let's get straight into this, guys. What's your best ever derby that you've ever been to, John? Start with you.
Well, I have to say my favourite game that I've attended probably in my football supporting days really was 1987 Littlewoods Cup semi-final replay. Tottenham won, Arsenal 2. That was an amazing night. In terms of, the atmosphere was sensational. Arsenal just had this habit of always coming from behind and kind of put Arsenal under the pathway to with George Graham basically. But then basically to cover. What do you sort of kind of, define as a derby and kind of, because I was going to sort of chuck in sort of kind of Liverpool against Man United last season, but that's a rivalry rather than a derby.
But they do call it a derby, but it's the derby that kind of doesn't geographically make sense.
It's a derby that doesn't exist, you mean?
Yeah,
it's not a derby.
Well, it's a rivalry.
Yeah, but it's enough of a rivalry to be called a derby.
It's a rivalry.
You still call it Derby Day.
The Manchester derby is United versus City.
But they care about United football more.
They might care about it, but it's not a derby.
Yeah. United fans they do care about beating Liverpool more than in a way City, don't you think, even still?
No, not now, I don't.
I guess we've got to talk about what makes the derby. So there's geopolitical, there's geographical, there's hatred. I mean, the Tottenham, Arsenal, obviously both North London, but Arsenal kind of shoved themselves in there, didn't they?
They did, yeah. I think this is the strange one, isn't it? That basically Chelsea Spurs, in that basically I do think there's I think Chelsea view it far more importantly than kind of their hatred and their London rivalry than the other way round.
3-point lane.
Well, absolutely. And probably, arguably, one of my favourite derbies that I've sort of kind of covered. It was just because of the dramatic sense of it, and it was so frenetic, it was so crazy, was in 2016 when Chelsea basically beat Spurs and kind of, at Stamford Bridge when it all kicked off. It was fantastic. That, to me, is everything that a derby is, basically. It was full-on hatred. It was Chelsea being particularly rubbish that season in comparison to what they're normally like. But they went all in to try and stop Spurs winning the title. Listen, I think if the point being that basically Spurs, even if they won that night, I think that they probably wouldn't have won the title anyway because Leicester had just had that gap. But it was the sense that basically we're going to do for their title, and it was a crazy, crazy raucous night. So much going on off the ball, so many rows, so many bust-ups, so much said, so much done. And it was
That's
crazy
what we love
to
about
cover.
Football.
Well, exactly. And that, to me, was the epitome of a derby. I've been lucky enough to do loads and loads and loads, but of all, the ones that probably stands out because there was so much at stake. I just thought in that Chelsea-Spurs game, I had absolutely everything. So I do think that was probably arguably the best derby that I've covered.
Completely nicked my choice.
Sorry.
Unbelievable.
I didn't know you were going to choose it.
Not just nicked it as well. I've gone through the whole detail of it, so I've got nothing left to refer to.
Sorry.
I'd love to do one of the big foreign derbies, actually. I'd love to go to a Scottish derby as well, obviously Celtic and Rangers, an Old Firm derby. I'd love to do that.
Everyone tells me that is... so whenever I put this debate on social media and I talk about El Clasico, which I'll get into later, everyone comes back at me with, but you've not been to an Old Firm and that is the biggest and the best. You've been to a few of them, right?
I think I've done 3. I did 2 at Ibrox and 1 at Celtic Park, and that was when Gazza was playing for Rangers. Not the best games. I think there's just too much on them for them to be great games. And to be fair, I can't even remember the results. All I remember is the noise.
Yeah.
Just sitting in the press box, and I was one of the games I was sitting next to Rob Shepherd and I couldn't hear anything that he said. Now, some might say that was a blessing in disguise. But the bottom line is you could not actually hear the person next to you talking because of the noise.
Is Ibrox or Celtic Park, which is noisier? Is there?
So I don't know. I think they're both the same, but it's just constant singing, constant barracking. I've never known anything like it.
You say the Old Firm derby. I've heard it a lot at El Clasico as well. Real Madrid against Barcelona. Oh yeah, absolutely. El Clasico is the biggest.
Not.
Yes, it is. Are you kidding me?
It's the same as Manchester. It's the same as Manchester. It's not the same.
It's a super Clasico. It's a massive rivalry.
It's a rivalry.
It's
not a derby. It's a rivalry.
When you talk about like genuine derbies, though, like you were saying, like obviously El Clasico is not like a proper derby, but it's where households are split as well. Often, like so, Merseyside derby is a perfect example. You've got entire households that are half and half, and I do think that kind of like supercharges the energy, doesn't it?
Yeah, it does. I've been lucky enough to be a few Merseyside derbies, and I do think the difference in that in recent times has been that it has generally been so one-sided that basically if you're wrapped up in it, if you're a supporter of those, then fantastic. But, and you're going to love it, and basically of the opportunity and the upset that it can bring. I mean, it's for both teams, it's a chance to sort of kind of beat the other, and generally Liverpool do it, don't they? That's the long and short of it.
I know we've got some other sort of derbies coming before, but I honestly think a fascinating derby this season is going to be that first Tottenham-Chelsea game because of Pochettino and the storyline. Sometimes the derbies can be driven around the storylines and personalities within them. Obviously for years we had Sol Campbell who'd crossed the divide between Tottenham and Arsenal, and that definitely added something pretty horrible for quite a long time for the abuse he used to get. And I do think that first sight of Pochettino in a Chelsea dugout against Tottenham, given what he meant to Tottenham, I do think that's going to be a supercharged derby this season because of that. I think that is kind of the derby to watch almost.
You just wonder, don't you, if it matters less a bit derbies because there are fewer players who are sort of like the through and through the youth ranks. And so on a derby day, I think to have players that understand that rivalry, understand that hatred is so important. And I think as the more sort of foreign transfers we're having, the less of that we kind of see. I don't know if that makes the derby less
although some of them take it on. I mean, going back to the Battle of the Bridge, Cesc Fabregas's behaviour that night was very interesting. It's probably not repeatable what he was doing to the Tottenham players, but he was grabbing them where he shouldn't be grabbing them. And that was very much with his Arsenal hat on. He was particularly determined to stop Tottenham winning the league. One for Chelsea and also because of his Arsenal allegiances there as well. I think, but I mean, he had, when you say about growing up, he had actually sort of grown up in Arsenal, so he had that in him. But some of the foreign players,
that's what I mean, like the importance of players getting that.
Listen to a piece with Thierry Henry, and he was talking about when he came into the Arsenal dressing room for the first time. He basically got told there's only 2 games where you really have to be at your very, very best. And obviously you want to be at every game, but you really have to show up. And that's the North London derbies. And you had Tony Adams in the dressing room. You had Martin Keown in the dressing room who'd all been imbued by that. Right, this matters. This matters more than any other game. And Thierry Henry said, I didn't think I'd understand it. He said, but in the build-up to the North London derby, it would be, we don't lose this. This is the one game we don't lose. He said, it doesn't matter where you come from in the world. He knew automatically that this game was special and that he was even more,
you have to get up
even
for
more
it,
on his mettle. And I've seen Thierry Henry destroy Spurs countless times.
You cover Chelsea a lot, Matt, and you wonder when you look at that Chelsea squad, who are the players that understand? If you were to ask that squad, what's the biggest rivalry, and who's there to tell them what the biggest game is? Like you say, who is that person that's going to, come in and say, these are the games that matter? I just think that it lacks a bit of that, right?
It's a good point. I mean, they've made Reece James captain, haven't they? So I suppose Reece James is meant to be back for that Arsenal game and should be playing if he's fit for the Tottenham game. So I'm assuming a lot of that's going to fall on his shoulders. But that's a good point. I mean, it is a deficiency.
Does he seem like that type?
But he doesn't. No, he doesn't strike me as the type who's going to be sort of like tub thumping
no John
in the
Terry.
Or Tony Adams.
No.
Or even you could have seen Mason Mount doing something like that as well. But that is a deficiency of the Chelsea squad, probably, that they don't quite have that. But then Tottenham, I mean, Kane's record against London opposition was just ridiculous, absolutely ridiculous. And again, they don't have him and that mentality that he brought in that game for them. So yeah, it's going to be interesting which people sort of stand up and which don't in those fixtures now, because there's a few of those traditionally good players who would help teams through that just not around now.
Yeah, you see that. I think there's still a lot sort of historic clubs like Liverpool. I think you've got a lot of players there that would again understand that meaning. And that's the thing, you just can't go around the city centre on Derby Day. Like, I suppose that's it, isn't it? It's the thing where you don't go out on the night. So nowadays you see footballers, they'll lose a match and they'll go out and think that that's okay.
And if you've got a homegrown lad in the team, I do think it makes a difference. I mean, I'm going to bring it back to Villa again. Gabby Agbonlahor would always score against Birmingham City.
Yeah.
Jack Grealish gets punched by a Birmingham City fan, gets up and scores the winning goal at St Andrews, legendary status.
I loved that.
And you'll be able to throw Arsenal, you'll be able to throw West Ham. If you've got a lad who's local and can just sort of give it some in a derby, oh my word, what that gives him with the fans is incredible.
I know we talk about sort of now, do the players still feel it? Does Virgil van Dijk still feel it for Liverpool Everton? I would argue absolutely yes.
He's got that character, doesn't he?
He has, but also you need that balance in the dressing room. And where's he get that from? He gets that from Alexander-Arnold. He gets that from Curtis Jones. Previously got it from, Hendo, Steven Gerrard. And basically you just grow up with that. Yeah. And I think that is why it's so, certain managers will embrace that kind of homegrown sort of kind of culture and basically the local lad, and always, think that that's massively important. And I actually think
it's huge.
Massive credit to Klopp. He definitely does.
Yeah,
he really embraces it. When they made Alexander-Arnold, I couldn't really think of Alexander-Arnold as a captain, but he's made him vice captain. Yeah. And they based it on the sort of kind of feeling that he's a local lad.
Yeah.
And there's so fair play. And I think he grows into that role, and I think he'll embrace it.
I mean, speaking about players that get it, and I sort of talk about academy players or English players, but it doesn't have to be. I mean, take Didier Drogba. I know you covered Chelsea a lot in those days, and he came in and he just got it. Chelsea against Arsenal, he was always on fire in those games.
Yeah, he was. I mean, all the big games, to be honest with you. He had that incredible knack of turning up in the big games, even when he was having a bad time. But yeah, I mean, he used to destroy Arsenal. I mean, they couldn't cope with him at all. And Chelsea themselves, under the Mourinho years and everything, they had an incredible record against Arsenal, didn't they? I remember one that I did cover not so long ago when Wenger and Mourinho started scrapping on the sideline, and one of them grabbed the other one's tie, and it was at the game Hazard went through and scored a sensational goal. I mean, there's been some genuinely really good, but it was always Chelsea who had the upper hand. But in recent years, that's flipped, hasn't it? And Arsenal have stolen that sort of momentum away from them.
That manager needle is important as well, I think. I love it when the managers are at it. Don't you? Does it matter to you?
No, I think sometimes it looks a little bit pathetic. I know they get caught. You get caught up in the occasion, but I do think there's it's slightly pathetic to grown men sort of butting chests, and
it's storyline. No,
I was about to say we shouldn't be too critical of it.
I'm not critical from a media perspective. It's absolutely fantastic. Don't get me wrong. When Pardew and Wenger went, toe to toe,
What's the biggest one? Which two managers hate each other the most?
Mourinho and Wenger.
Mourinho and also Mourinho.
That's going back to that time.
Mourinho, Wenger and Fergie.
Fergie and Wenger was really spiteful.
Then it switched, didn't it? I mean, Wenger just could not. No. I mean, Mourinho really got into Wenger's head, didn't he?
He did. Why I think it's relevant. Well, he did, But why I think it's relevant is that, yes, I know it's personalities and it's great headlines, great photos on the back pages. But in my mind, there's no doubt it affected Wenger as a manager. Yeah. So it really ate into his abilities because he was so obsessed, I think, with those personalities. Yeah. I don't think so much with Fergie. I think it was, during the time when Arsenal were much more successful. But, obviously as time passed and he had a brief spell when he was still at enemies with Fergie, but kind of Arsenal weren't so competitive. But there's no doubt in my mind that Mourinho's rivalry with Wenger affected Wenger's.
Well, I think Mourinho set the scene for that when he called
Voya.
Which I thought was as distasteful a quote as I've ever. I mean,
he's overstepped the mark a few times.
Wenger actually treated Fergie quite I'm not in a patronising manner, but there was I think there was a respect, you know, and there was the famous when Fergie said something about Arsenal and Wenger said, well, everybody thinks they've got the prettiest wife, and that really sparked Fergie off. But I think there was an element of respect, and Fergie went at Wenger because he knew Arsenal were a threat.
Going back to the Arsenal-Chelsea derby, I do think if you look at the Arsenal squad, you know, we're assuming Saka will be back for that. You know, they've got Saka, who's a homegrown lad. He's not a homegrown lad, but they've got someone like Declan Rice, who's going to get the rivalry, and obviously he probably feels a little bit of needle towards Chelsea as well within that. I think they've just got slightly more. It'll be very interesting from the Chelsea's perspective whether any of those very young, very new players can step up, really. And it's probably an opportunity for them. You know, someone like Enzo Fernandez, who the fans absolutely love for some reason. He's very nice on the eye. He hasn't had a big moment yet. He scored one goal against Wimbledon in the Carabao Cup. I haven't seen a big moment from him yet, 105 million. If he were to score in that game, all of a sudden, you know, there's an opportunity there for a Chelsea player to do something.
Have the kind of games that he was having for Brighton, because he hasn't had those kind of games yet for
But there is
Chelsea.
an opportunity there for one of those sort of young players with a big reputation who's come in. It's the game where if they can have a moment, it could really become a big deal for them.
Thiago Silva is a player that does seem to weirdly get that kind of rivalry, but probably just because of his age and experience rather than the fact that he has any particular affiliation. But like you say, like
the length of his career would have seen him come through big derby games. And he will know what they
It matters, doesn't it? It's a funny one with derbies, isn't it? Because usually there's sort of like a cycle where, so like say if it's Manchester United against Liverpool, for like there's a period of dominance for Manchester United and then maybe a period of dominance for Liverpool. When it comes to the Merseyside derby, like it's just all Liverpool. I just don't see if it's the same, but yet it still seems to sort of appear high on the agenda, doesn't it, as a derby?
I think it's what John said. I mean, that's like, it becomes a derby about the fans, doesn't it? Because the fans, no matter how much the disparity is, the fans will always buy into it. You know, Everton fans will go to every single Merseyside derby dreaming that, you know, this is going to be the one and this is going to be the turning point for them in the derbies. I think it does slightly diminish it to the outside world because people like me will slightly think, well, it's a foregone conclusion. It's not really that exciting, but that doesn't take anything away from it for the fans. And you know, for Everton, for the team who's been on the sort of wrong end of it for so long, actually with every bad result in a derby, every time they then get the opportunity, it becomes bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger.
This sounds so patronising, but never in a million years do I believe that Liverpool fans would want Everton to go down.
No, I was thinking
I agree with that.
To suddenly lose that, that's such a fixture. That's the one they look for at the beginning of the season.
Absolutely,
right?
it's a passion. It's it's something that you so look forward to. You so embrace as a fan. You know, even if it's you turn up and you beat Everton, you still want to do that. And I think you flip it on its head, and when they're at Goodison, it's still, even you can go to an average game at Goodison and still be enthralled by the atmosphere. I mean, I did Everton-Arsenal recently, and what a game that was. It was pretty rubbish for 90 minutes. It wasn't a very good game at all. But actually, because of the atmosphere and because of the encouragement that Everton's amazing fan base give them, it basically completely transforms your experience. And when Liverpool have to go into that bear pit of Goodison, it's one of the occasions of the season.
Amazing.
And then also for Everton fans, when they have to go to Anfield, they think, if we pull off a shock here, this will be, kind of legendary status if we can kind of get the result. And that's what it offers as a derby. But I tell you what, Liverpool, bearing in mind, the pace of the title race and that Liverpool, want to be in it. I've loved Szoboszlai. He's my new favourite player in the Premier League. I do think they've kind of got to win that game to kind of just keep abreast. They've made a good start, but they sort of kind of had sort of a couple of bad results in a row by what they would want, and so they've got to go and win that game.
Yeah, just a quick word, because we've done a lot of sort of the obvious derbies, but we haven't mentioned Newcastle, Sunderland, which is massive. I guess you guys have been to a few of those over the years. One of
the best games that I've ever been to was in the pouring rain when Ruud Gullit signed his own P45 basically by dropping both Alan Shearer and Duncan Ferguson. And Kevin Phillips and Niall Quinn absolutely ran riot, and that was basically the end for Ruud Gullit.
But that's a rivalry, obviously, that doesn't exist anymore. Well, certainly not in the Premier League, which is a real shame.
Yeah, but I mean, Sunderland are sort of upwardly mobile again. It might come back. I mean, obviously Newcastle are very upwardly mobile. So how much of a contest that'll be in the years to come, who knows? But yeah, I mean, look, that region, derbies are massive, and you're dead right to bring up, derbies around the country. Even one of the best derbies I went to. I was a student and following Preston for a year, and went to Preston at Blackpool, and I mean that was crazy, absolutely crazy. And some of the fiercest derbies are well outside the top flight, because this is their cup final. The
East Lancs derby with Blackburn and Burnley is supposed to be a bit feisty.
But I mean that becomes their literally their cup final. Yeah. So all around the country, everyone will argue their derby's the biggest derby.
Yeah. Southampton Portsmouth is one of my favourite ones. That's a belter.
And what about when it's really one-sided? So like when it's sort of like, I don't know, QPR Chelsea or QPR Fulham, where one side sees it as a massive derby and the other doesn't really care.
Well, I like it simply because I just think that, for one side, it's absolutely everything. The other side, it might not matter so much, but I still think it's relevant. QPR, been to those games at sort of kind of Loftus Road, because of the small stadium, fantastic atmosphere, and I do like those. Blimey,
you're trying to tell him Brentford fans when they go away to Stamford Bridge and win, that it doesn't really matter to Chelsea, because it mattered on that day.
Cheers, guys, for sharing your Derby Day stories. That is High Press, brought to you by William Hill in partnership with the Football Writers Association. I'm Alison Bender, and don't forget, we'll be here weekly, so make sure you subscribe for all your weekly episodes. 18+, please gamble responsibly.